Hey guys, this is Dave here with a look at Watch Dogs 2 on consoles. So this sequel features a very different look to the original game. It's brighter, more vibrant and more colourful all round. You could say it definitely has more of a stylised look. That said, the game is still backed up by cool rendering technology designed to infuse realism in the world. So we still have the use of physically based shading, allowing for surfaces to reflect light accurately. And of course the lighting model, which was already solid in the original Watch Dogs, has been given a boost in this sequel in order to add more depth and sparkle to the environments. It doesn't really bridge the gap in trying to match that 2012 reveal for the series, but it is a step up from the original game with some welcome visual upgrades. That being said, how well does the game hold up across different platforms? Well, to kick things off, here's a look at PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. In terms of the baseline rendering setup, well, it seems pretty straightforward. PS4 version operates at native 1080p, while Xbox One hands in a native 900p presentation, which gives the game a slightly softer look than on the PlayStation 4. Though neither versions target an absolute pin-sharp presentation, there's definitely an intentionally smooth overall look. There's nothing particularly wrong with that, but at the same time image quality could be better here. There's a distinct fuzziness around edges across both versions of the game, and jaggies and shimmering are commonplace. A close look at the image reveals distinct checkerboarding style artifacts across both platforms, not just on edges, but across transparencies and even texture details. What's interesting here is that Watch Dogs 2 isn't actually using checkerboarding at all. There's no weird upscale trickery going on. So what is happening? Well, the artifacts here appear very similar to those we saw in The Crew, albeit, well, perhaps slightly more pronounced. And this is caused by Ubisoft's choice of anti-aliasing. The game looks like it's using a form of temporal reconstruction, a bit like we saw in Far Cry 4. And in fact, I kind of think this may actually be a modified implementation based on that, judging by what we've heard in the past. The downside is the implementation here just doesn't look right, with plenty of artifacting. And that's a bit of a shame, because the presentation, when you look at it closely on PS4, actually has some quite nice sharp edges, and the 900p on the Xbox One could actually appear crisper. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fuzziness due to this anti-aliasing technique, and it's not ideal. Beyond the basic image quality setup, there really isn't much to separate these two platforms. Shadows are rendered at slightly higher resolution on PlayStation 4, which reduces the amount of stair-stepping artifacts. Though it's worth pointing out that harsh, sawtooth edges are frequently visible across both platforms. It's only when looking up close where we can see slightly more refinement on the PS4 in this area, but during gameplay there's not really that much of a difference. Aside from that, gamma doesn't quite match up using the default settings, with the Xbox One version appearing slightly washed out, but this can be improved by using manual correction, though arguably you really shouldn't have to do this when using a calibrated TV. Moving on to performance, and well, it's a pretty standard setup we're seeing here. Watch Dogs 2 targets 30 frames per second and operates with an adaptive VSync. This means that when the engine can't quite sustain the desired frame rate, then it introduces tearing instead, essentially rendering out incomplete frames to the screen in order to help prevent significant frame rate drops. For the most part, this actually works pretty well, particularly on PlayStation 4, where we often see a lot 30 FPS for extended periods. Stressful scenes do throw up a few torn frames, but nothing major, and the experience actually feels pretty solid for the most part. On first impressions, the Xbox One initially hands in, well, a kind of similar gameplay experience too, in a sense that in less demanding scenes the game tends to hold 30 FPS very nicely, with only some occasional tearing, but once the engine starts becoming taxed, then frame rates aren't so stable on Microsoft's platform and there's more tearing. This is particularly evident in this scene as we mercilessly gun down police officers. As backup arrives, the screen is filled with more police cars, and of course in that respect more lighting effects. All of this adds an increased rendering load, and while the PlayStation 4 handles this perfectly well, on Xbox One we see dropped frames and constant screen tearing, which results in a distinct stutter. Gameplay here really isn't quite as smooth as it could be, And during other action-heavy moments such as racing down busy streets, we also see a similar thing occurring, albeit there's slightly less in the way of tearing and frame rate drops, but overall, performance does tend to be impacted a little more often on Xbox One. So that's the standard consoles cover, but what about PS4 Pro? Well, at the moment the experience is something of a mixed bag. In terms of image quality though, we do see a massive improvement. Now the game uses checkerboarding to render up to 1800p, regardless of whether you're outputting 1080p or 4K from the console. But for full HD owners, the game takes the 1800p image and then downsamples this to 1080p. Essentially, this provides you with super sampling anti-aliasing, delivering a much cleaner image compared to the base PlayStation 4 game and indeed the Xbox One release. On top of that, the somewhat broken anti-aliasing we see on the standard consoles is nowhere to be found, so we get a full, crisp 1080p image that, well, looks exactly as you'd imagine a full HD presentation to look, with a decent level of anti-aliasing. Unfortunately, there is an unwanted downside when running the game on PS4 Pro, and that comes in the form of performance. It just doesn't run as smoothly compared to on the base PlayStation 4 hardware. For example, in scenes where the base PlayStation 4 game delivers a locked 30 FPS, there is visibly more tearing on the Pro, and when moving in more demanding areas, the gap in performance widens, with considerably more tearing on PS4 Pro along with more pronounced frame rate drops. And this results in an experience that simply isn't as smooth, there's more stutter, and the game doesn't feel as good to play. It's not an ideal situation, and to be honest, it really shouldn't be happening. We should be getting equal or better performance with the improvement in image quality. Overall then, Watch Dogs 2 is a somewhat interesting release. The Sony machine takes command in terms of image quality, and there's a slight boost to shadow resolution. Performance is also more stable too, so in that respect, the base PlayStation 4 version is the better of the two in terms of the standard consoles. The Xbox One version isn't bad per se, but performance certainly could do with a little more optimization in places. That said, neither of these two platforms hand in optimal image quality, and the choice of anti-aliasing in this case is somewhat questionable given the fuzziness it introduces. Playing on PlayStation 4 Pro allows us to avoid some of these image quality issues, but ultimately the situation is far from perfect and performance isn't where it should be. Hopefully we'll see Ubisoft patch this out in the future, but right now there isn't really an ideal version of Watch Dogs 2 to play on consoles. If you want the best gameplay experience with regards to performance, then the base PlayStation 4 version is the way to go. Anyway, I think that about covers it. As usual, if you'd like to support Digital Foundry, don't forget to like or subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.